All right. Good morning. Good morning. Perhaps good afternoon. Welcome everybody to Brivia's monthly webinar. Today's webinar topic is Workplace Culture Part 2. Behavior says it all. We tackled the subject of workplace culture last month, and it's such a big topic. We thought let's do that again and dig a little bit deeper, which we're excited to do. But before we get on, I'm actually introduce my co-host in just a moment here with you all. What you'll see here is I want to thank you all for signing up. These webinars just constantly surprise us with the amount of registration and engagement that we have month over month. So thank you for signing up. If you want to stay connected with us, I encourage you to hit the QR code on this page and sign up for the Getting to Better newsletter, which is Brivia's monthly newsletter, which is a way of us staying connected with you all. So I encourage you to do that. My name is Chris Downey. I am one of the co-founders of Brivia. I'm excited to be here with you today. We are here for 45 minutes, which is our usual format. And as always, we want to make sure our time together is as interactive as possible. We'll be asking you some questions. So we're encouraging you to engage on the chat, use the Q&A function, which is always appreciated. Some of you that have been here before have already started off. I'm joining you from my home office in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Let us know how you're doing this morning and where you're joining us from. I'd love to see that. I see we have folks out in Vancouver. We also have, I know we have some folks joining us from Alberta. Hopefully it's not, you're able to breathe okay. And we are all over, including Egypt. Okay, this is spectacular. Thank you for engaging, folks. So just one other thing before we move into the webinar proper. Know that we're recording today's session, and we're going to share that with you. It was our website has all of our previous webinars posted on them, but we'll actually send you this link for you to share with others as well. So don't feel the need to write a bunch of notes down, because we'll give you a copy of the webinar as well, along with some handouts. So one of the things I'm going to introduce you to a great friend and a co-founder of Brivia. For today, I mentioned the subject of workplace culture being so big, and it really is. And so I'm going to introduce my friend Steve DeGroot here, and Steve and I have had the chance to travel all over. We have spent countless hours in boardrooms and training rooms and offices talking about this very subject. We've talked about it formally, and he and I have certainly talked about this informally. So we thought, what better way to tackle this subject than for Steve and I to come together and actually run this webinar as a pair. So if you haven't met Steve before, I know most of you have. Steve is just a great human being that has devoted his life to helping others. He's been doing this both formally and informally, but professionally, he's been helping people as a therapist, as an adjunct professor of human behavior. Of course, he's also the founder of the Getting to Better initiative and the founder of Brivia, and is currently the president and continues to help. He's also an author of Responsive Leadership, which is a Sage Publications, a book that's used in institutions all over the world. And he's actually working on his most recent book right now called Getting to Better. It's a new framework for elevating human potential, which will be released in the coming months, which we're very excited about. So Steve, welcome. I'm happy to have you here with me today to take us through this journey.
Hey, Chris, and hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be back. It's been a while that I've been on the webinars, and it's great to see and thanks for the great introduction, Chris. I mean, you're such a good friend and a great colleague. It's so fun to be here because we travel so much, and good to see some of our partners and our friends online from all over the world is awesome. And this topic is something all of us are concerned about. And, you know, we kind of tongue in cheek talk about, does it make you roll your eyes? Are we talking about culture again? Do we need another article from 30 years, and it's this elusive, evasive thing that we call culture. And today we're going to talk about some honesty and some things that we both know has worked for some of our clients, and including some of the stuff for our own company. So I'm super excited. I love to see everyone in the chat already active and engaged. Keep that going. Throw your questions and answers into the queue. We want to do this together. You're our co-pilots on this journey to better culture. So I'm going to kick it back to Chris, and I am stoked. So thanks, Chris. Back to you.
Yeah, awesome, Steve. I share your enthusiasm and excitement here for sure. So for those of you that joined us last month, we talked a lot about culture. And if you weren't here last month, that's okay. We're going to hit the highlights anyway, so you haven't missed a step. But last month, we started off by talking about workplace culture and what is it, and why does it matter? Why is this so important? So just to situate us a little bit and reset this, culture, as we like to say, it's the way things actually get done within your organization. It's not what you say you are, it's what you actually do. It's the social order of things that has either arisen intentionally or organically over time. It's the way that we do things. And the reason it matters so much is that it's there. Whether you're paying attention to it or not, culture is present. The moment human beings come together, culture starts to form. And culture will influence the behavior of the people that make it up. So it is really, really important, particularly in organizations, that we pay attention to our culture to make sure that the people that are part of organizations are behaving in ways that are preferred. So it's there, whether we're paying attention or not, it's always there. It's there right now with this group of us. We're creating our own microculture right now, and who speaks and when. And Steve and I are establishing a bit of protocol, which hopefully we did put some intention behind, but it matters because it does influence the behavior. And if we want our organizations to be successful, it requires our attention. So that's what it is and why it's so important. For those of you that have participated in webinars before, we like you to go in on your own experience. So before we get too deep into the content on this webinar, what I'd like for you to do, and let's use the chat on this, we'd like for you to reflect on what values are important to you as you carry out your work. Whatever it is that you do, what values are important to you? So not your organization, to you as individuals. What do you find important? Integrity, Tina, thank you. And I see Steve, fun. I don't doubt that one at all. Integrity, transparency, okay, mutual respect, honesty. I have to tell you, you're hitting a few of my core here, folks. Let's keep them coming. I really want you to connect with what you feel is important to you as you carry work. Steve, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing pop up here?
Well, I love to see, seeing respect and fairness, absolutely. Ethics and trust. Trust has come up quite a bit. Kindness has come up quite a bit too. And I think what's really interesting is we all come to work and we have personal values that are important to us, and we want to connect with those and we want to actually live those, right? And I think when we come to places, have relationships and are in environments that endorse, look at some of these positive intentions, acknowledgement, accountability, that we feel and do our best. And I love it. Like, it's one of my favorite things, Chris. I get super stoked about it and excited about living our values. But let's add to the reflection a little bit, right? Everyone knows that we love excitement and inspiration, but also some honesty. So I want to ask another reflection, right? So I want you to think about, even though you value kindness and integrity and respect and listening and meaning and all those things, let me ask you this question. Have you ever been in an environment where you were working with a team or people that said those same values were important and they behaved in a way that didn't align with that? I want to see that in the chat. So right out of the gate, yes, we're seeing this. How about, so we've all had to look at, it's, oh my gosh, all the time. Okay, absolutely. Now I try to giggle because it's sad as well. Let me ask, how about not just the people around us, but what about leaders? Have you ever been on a team or in an environment when you've experienced leaders that were behaving in ways that went against the things that we said or we agreed? How about we agreed that they were important? Now, unfortunately, we're seeing that happens lots. What was the impact? I want to see what the impact was. We did some webinars on accountability and on values and stuff. What was the impact when you were in environments where you felt like people were acting in a way or behaving in a way that went against us? So I'm seeing in the chat, not good. I'm seeing toxic. I'm seeing some words I can't repeat. A loss of trust, a lack of trust. Look at this, almost high turnover feeling defeated under the veil of fear. So absolutely. And one of the things before I pass it back to Chris, because I want to know what he thinks about this, is unfortunately what it does is it impacts our, not only our behavior, but our motivation. It impacts our engagement. It impacts our how committed we feel and how much we can focus and what we bring to work. So we're going to talk about how we as individuals and as leaders, more importantly, how can we avoid this incongruence and this fragmentation so that we can work towards behaving in a way that's congruent with the values that we say are important. Awesome. Chris, I'm going to put it back over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Steve. And thank you for your participation in the chat here. This is really quite interesting to have been reading along when we ask what's important to you. And there was just this push of, we'll call it awesomeness, these important values, mutual respect. And then when Steve asked you to reflect on that incongruent, when you've experienced incongruence, the impact that has, and we're seeing this idea of anger and reduced motivation. I think the takeaway for me with all of this is our culture is defined by the behavior that we experience, what we see in practice, not what we say, not what's up on the walls. It's what we actually do. And thank you for that, for going deep on that reflection, because you validate the fact that it has an impact. It has an impact. And if it's out of step with what we say is important, it has a very negative impact. And hopefully if we flip that, if you're in an environment where you were experiencing those values, and there would be the flip side to that, where it would be energy and enthusiasm. But what we know for certain is the culture is defined by the behavior that you see. So let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. When we say behavior, what do we mean? And we believe this. In the title, we put behavior says it all, because we believe that. We spend a lot of time working with organizations to learn about their culture so we can help them get to better. And the reality is, what we do is we walk around and we watch how people behave. And we look for a few things. We look for the actions. The visible actions. What are people actually doing? Not what are they saying they're doing, but what are they actually doing? And conversely, what are they not doing? Right? So what are the actions and what are the inactions that are visible? And ultimately, it comes down to those interactions. Right? So we say behavior says it all. It is the visible behavior that defines your culture. And the reason we talk about this being so important is, independent of what you as an individual value, when you come into a culture, if it has influence on how we behave. And if we come into an organizational culture that isn't healthy, it can lead to us behaving in ways that ultimately we don't feel good about. So we want to tend to our culture to make sure that it's as healthy as possible, so when people come in, they can be the best version of themselves. And leaders, of course, play a very key role in creating that healthy workplace culture. So there's two things we really want to highlight here today. We go pretty heavy on leaders. I have to say, I recognize that we put a lot of weight on leaders' shoulders, but that's for good reason, because leaders have the most impact on the overall health of the organizational culture. There's two things that leaders need to do on top of all of the things that are in your job description, which is a very lengthy list. The first is this: set the standard. And I even saw this in the chat earlier. Walk the talk. So do what you say you're going to do. Behave in ways that are in step with what we claim is important. So 100% leaders need to set the standard. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But where we're going to focus most of our time on today is leaders also need to support and reinforce a preferred culture. So it's one thing to lead by example, but leaders need to be paying attention and tend to those conditions and not let them get too far away, because that's where we can pull away. So there's two things that we're going to focus on. I want to just quickly touch base on setting the standard as leaders. As I mentioned, we go pretty heavy on leaders, but the way we see it at Brivia is leaders impact everything. And I want to be clear, we think leaders are at the center of it all, but it doesn't mean you're the center of the universe. So I want to be crystal clear about this. These are two different things. But leaders have such a profound impact for this reason: how leaders communicate, how they behave, their interactions, the statements that they make. be it in a formal setting or even informal. You could be waiting in line for coffee and having an informal conversation. The things you're doing, the things that you are saying are sending signals out to the organization around what do we truly value, what's important to us. And it's how leaders communicate and the messages that they send that lead to the level of commitment, that determines the level of commitment with the organization or the level of engagement. That shapes the employee experience, right? So how our leaders communicate determines how engaged our organization ultimately is. And it's that level of commitment that defines your culture. And it's the culture that's going to determine your ability to convert. And what we mean by conversion is conversion on results, however you define results, whether it could be profitability, it could be output. Your culture has a direct impact on that. And the culture is formed as a result of the level of commitment with the organization. And that level of commitment is driven by how your leaders communicate. So one of the things we talk about, that if you think about that circle right in the center, ideally an organization has a very clear compass where the vision, where the mission and the values are articulated well, and the strategy is there. And leaders then use that to guide them through their communications. Now, not all organizations do have a set compass. Some have broken compasses that are set, but that doesn't negate the leader's responsibility to both lead by example and also tend to those conditions. So leaders need to walk the talk, as we say. They need to walk the talk in order to create a healthy workplace culture. And I'm going to get Steve to chime in on this because he speaks so eloquently to it. But there are a lot of contributing factors to healthy cultures. We talked about them last month. But there are two key elements that all healthy cultures have. And Steve, I'll let you pick up on this because I think you say it so well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Chris. You did such a good job. And the chat is so engaged and lots of great information. So we're coming down to this. This is something that we've learned over and over and over for an organization to have a healthy and high-performing culture. And let's be clear, high-performing doesn't always mean healthy, and healthy doesn't mean high-performing. So we're trying to combine these. And for a culture that we want, that we're trying to attain to be healthy and high-performing, it requires two very important variables. Right? For it to be developed, strengthened, and sustained, it must have two things. One is a common language. Okay, a common language and values in practice. Now, you know, one of the greatest examples we use is our Indigenous brothers and sisters here in Canada, right? A reclamation of culture, a strengthening of culture over the last couple of decades requires two things: reclaiming the language, but also reclaiming the teachings, the 7 teachings and the teachings in practice. So let's talk about a common language, bring it back to the organization. A common language is about a clear and consistent way of communicating. A common language that connects us, provides like clarity on how we interact with each other, how we talk. It's the questions we ask, the key sentiments we use. How do we make decisions? How do we handle conflict? Healthy cultures have and hold that shared language, and a common language also holds other important variables, which is the values. Shared values that are known and understood to everybody. More importantly, it's the values in practice, right? It's the actions, interactions, and inactions that Chris talked about that ultimately define our culture. Now, remember, we've talked about values, but values are just words until our actions give them meaning. And we as leaders have got to ask that question: what meaning are we giving the values by the way that we behave and the way that we interact with each other? What do we say is important? And finally, this is important for teams and organizations that are putting a great deal of time and energy into the culture development, right? We see your efforts, we see the frustration and the stresses and the commitment that you're making. Without these two things, a common language and shared values in practice, we've come to see that all efforts at improving culture will struggle, and many will stay stuck. You will not create or attain the culture that you're striving for, right? And this is absolutely critical. And it might sound easy, but Chris, what do you, right? We can definitely help with this, and it doesn't have to be as hard as it seems. Chris.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I agree. And I love, I'm just reading in the chat there, Catherine had shared that Catherine watches out for behaviors that are celebrated versus punished. That's a really good indicator of the true culture. So I love that statement because this is important. Steve's absolutely right. Common language and values that are known and understood. So it's really important for you as leaders to know what you value as an organization. It's critical that you have an understanding as to what's important to you as an organization. And as I mentioned before, ideally, you have a compass that is set. And I'll tell you, if you don't have a compass that is set, you want some help, we love to do that work. Steve and I talk about traveling all over. That's something we've done lots of work all over Canada and elsewhere with, is helping organizations set their compass so they're really clear on what's going to guide their work going forward. But even if you don't have a fully operational compass, those values are present. You want to connect, know what you value, know what's important. And the reason this is so important is, as leaders, if you're going to support and reinforce as a preferred culture, if you're going to know, as Catherine mentioned, what to celebrate and what to address, you need to be firmly planted in what's important. Because if you are, and you're paying attention, then you're aware of when other things start to slip in that influence organizational culture. So one of the things, Steve and I want to share with you here, there are values. Values are very important. We've obviously talked lots about them. But if we aren't paying attention to our culture and the conditions, other values can slip in and start to take over our culture and start to define it. And it starts to be one thing when we say something else. So actually, there's 3 types of values we want you as leaders to be on the lookout for, that if we aren't paying attention, can have a significant impact. And the first one we refer to as the sneaky value. And we call it sneaky because the thing is, values are a good thing. But if we're not careful, values that are perhaps out of step with what we say is important can sneak in. And they're very unassuming, because on the surface, they're actually not a bad thing. But they can come in and cause tension with other values that we think is important, and it can start to take over. So an example of a sneaky value, I've got a couple I'll share here with you, right? Maybe you have an organization where you value integrity and honesty and humility, or something along those lines. And you have some people on your team that really value competition. That in and of itself isn't a bad thing. In fact, that can be a strength. Or maybe they value winning, right? And then now within our organization, we're focusing heavily on how can we win the next deal? How can we get that client? Oh, how can we take this over from that other organization that's doing that? And if you're not careful, that value has snuck in and started to influence how people are behaving. Now, the idea of a winning value or competitive value sneaking in, that one people might be able to relate to. But it could also, this is how unassuming it can be. Maybe you're an organization that values diversity and inclusion, right? And yet you spend a lot of time at the beginning of your meetings talking, the young parents are talking about their young children and young families, and they value family, which is a beautiful thing. I want to be clear about this. And over time, you look around the boardroom table and everyone that's at the table are all young parents. Oh, isn't that interesting, right? This value has kind of snuck in and taken over. And now it's not quite as diverse, or certainly as inclusive as we once wanted it to be. So we want to be paying attention to those, I call them sneaky values, to make sure that we're aware of how are we operating and is it in line with what's important to us. And Steve, I'll let you take the next one, because I know this is one that you identify often. So in addition to sneaky value, what else do you look out for?
Thanks, Jason. Look out for the sneaky value that creeps in and may take a lot of space. The one that we're talking about next is what we call the fair-haired value, the favorite value, right? And you can see in the chat, we have our favorites. We have the ones that we connect with, right? It's often the one that we lean on the most, right? And you'll hear people when they talk about their culture or what's important, and maybe it's not even on the wall, but often it's on the wall or on the plaque. But we lean on that. Maybe it's efficiency or results or accountability or innovation, and this is, as we're saying, this can be great, but sometimes the favorites happen at the expense of other values. They can actually eclipse other values, right? Not only undermine them, but compromise. They can start to compromise the connection. They can undermine clarity, and they can start to create confusion, right? Again, these aren't bad things, but when we lean towards one, we can do it at the expense of others, and that we got to be on the lookout for that favorite value that starts to define how we behave, and then we start to lose sight of the other ones, including the behaviors that come with them, right? So, Chris, did you want me to jump in on this next one, or did you want to kick off the next one? Because we have a lot of fun with this one.
I think this is one I'll introduce, and Steve, I think you can take it from here. So we've got the sneaky value. We want to be able to look forward. We've got the favorite value we lean on too much. And of course, then there's the absent value. And it's the one we all kind of feel there's something missing, but we can't put our finger on. Maybe tell us a little bit about the absent value, Steve.
Yeah, the absent value, it happens quite often. We've all been in organizations or teams where, it's the one that's not there but should be, right? What is it? Quality? Is it continuous learning? Or is it respect, right? It might even be fun. But sometimes, when it's missing, we can't claim it and it becomes awkward, right? And I've seen this early on when we used to talk about solutions focused or relationship based strengths and solutions. Sometimes everybody, we wanted a relationship to be a big part, but we didn't claim it. So the solutions took precedence, and the one that was absent was relationships. And we needed to elevate that and actually put it back in and say, look, it's important. Let's own it. Let's put it out there. Let's be intentional and give it the attention that it deserves so that we can create the culture and the behaviors that we want to reinforce. So we've got to be on the lookout. You feel the absent value, but like a friend that hasn't been there for a while that you miss dearly, we've got to elevate that absent value. So put it back over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. This is it. So as leaders, we want to understand what's important to us as an organization and be paying attention to what we are seeing to make sure, are we missing something? Are we over leveraging one of our values, or are some other ones, have some other values crept in? Now, this is important. How do we address when these values sneak in? Because this is it. Values, they aren't a bad thing. They're a good thing. So it can actually be, when we see values coming in, we want to approach it as leaders with care and curiosity. Before I made that example, I used that example of family. That's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with people talking about their families. I love to hear people talk about their families. But it could be something that might be having an influence, and we want to approach that with care and curiosity as leaders. And Steve, this is something I know that through your coaching, you do a really good job with. How can leaders, when they observe something that might be out of step, address it with their team by being curious and demonstrating care? What would you recommend?
Yeah, well, I think thanks, Chris. One of the biggest things to make really clear here is that most values incongruences happen unintentionally and unknowingly. That until we know that we're behaving in an incongruent way, and this is why we have to be very gentle with each other. You can be confused, you can be frustrated, but approach it with care and curiosity. What do we know about this from this person's perspective? And we like threes at Behaviour. So we talk about doing three things. The first one is just name it. That's it. We just want to name it. Just like gently, with respect and with dignity, call it out. What are the things that are important? What are we seeing? Let's name it and let's speak to it. Then we frame it. We're just going to frame it. We're going to put it in the context of what's important. How do we know what's important, right? Chris talked about the importance of the compass and really making those intentional values, right? Position it in the context of the compass, the vision, the mission, values. What have we agreed to? What values should be guiding our behavior, our actions, and our decisions? We should be able to answer, what's the point in this framing? Why are we expected to behave in this way? And then let's claim it. Claim it as just, this is about owning it. It's about taking responsibility for what we agreed to do. What we agreed to do is important. What do we do with the things that we own? We take care of them, right? Which means that when they're bent, we straighten them. When they're broken, we fix them or we replace them, and we do something to make what we own better. Right. And it's so important that we have to name it, claim it, and frame it so that we avoid something that we try to avoid, which is the negative. Chris.
Absolutely, Steve. And we approach that naming it, framing and claiming it with care and curiosity. One of the things to highlight, I want to be clear about when we say leaders need to be paying attention to what we're seeing from staff, but also the messaging that we are delivering as well. And perhaps our senior leaders, might we be sending an incongruent message between what is being said and what's not? I see here in the chat, there's a great conversation that's going on. The Rhonda's identified that at times, we can actually create conflicting values. In this case, there's an organization that really values face-to-face service, but yet we're placing value on remote work. Yeah, that you could see how that would be confusing. That would be something you would want to be curious about. And as Steve mentioned, you want to name it, you want to frame it and claim it. And when we do, we want to figure out how deep does it go? How deep does this, sometimes it's an awareness piece. Sometimes it's on the surface. Maybe you have an employee that's behaving in one way, we value something else. And as a leader, you want to address that. And it might simply just be an awareness piece. And they didn't realize, oh, that's not the way we do things, sir. Okay, thanks for clarifying it. But it might be deeper than that. It might actually, perhaps myself as a leader, I have sent the wrong message around what's important to us. Or us as a leadership team have sent a conflicting message that, okay, you can see why someone might be confused by that, using that example of we say face-to-face services is important, but yet we're encouraging people to work remotely. Maybe as leaders, we've sent the wrong message there, and we need to address that. It could also go deeper yet. Not always, it can, and this is what we talked about last month. Is it possible that there is something systemic that is operating that's out of step with what you're saying is important? Right? So when we do observe a value in congruence, this is where the curiosity piece comes in. As Steve mentioned, it's not a bad thing. Someone's just behaving in a way. We need to learn about that. Is it awareness? Is it a surface situation? If it is, let's address it. But oftentimes it's not. It could be influenced perhaps by leadership or the leadership team. And if that's the case, let's address it there. And if it's a systematic issue and it's a system we're responsible for, change the system to make sure it's aligned with the values that are important. It's entirely possible, though, that it might be a systemic issue that you can't change. And that's unfortunate, but that's a reality. Then as leaders, how are we going to operate in a way that is sending the message to the staff that they need to hear as well? So when you do address it, when you name it, frame it and claim it, you want to figure out how deep does this go? Because often we address things at an awareness, and that might solve the issue for the one individual. But if we don't address the leadership component, maybe we're continuing to send out the wrong messages. So you want to be connected with how deep it goes. Now, no matter how deep it goes, there's something very important here. Because again, we're talking about values, and something I've learned from Steve is that as humans, that's what drives us more than anything, is our value system. So when someone is behaving in ways that are aligned with ways that are important to them, there's actually nothing wrong with them, even though it might not be having a preferred result here. So Steve, I think this would be something I think for you to highlight. What's something that's most important for us to think about as leaders as we are addressing these incongruences at any level?
Yeah, well, we're human, and we've got to be gentle. We've got to be, approach with curiosity and care, as we talked about. One of the things that we see when we're talking about values, because they're so powerful, they're one of the most powerful forces of meaning and motivation. We've got to go gentle, because we've also got to not blame. It's important. Don't blame. No blaming. Because the moment we feel that we're wrong, or we've done something wrong, or that that we feel that sense of blame or accusation or judgment, that leads to shame. And sometimes it's a shameful feeling that kicks in. Sometimes we feel like we're being shamed. And the problem with blaming and shaming is that it leads to gaming, and we don't want gaming. And what is gaming? Gaming is when I feel uncertain, when I feel a disconnection and I feel unclear, I start to reposition myself. I start to be a little bit less honest, maybe. Someone asks me my opinion and I hold part of it back, and it becomes fragmented. This is what we call gaming. It's not a bad thing, but we often do it to protect ourselves. Right? And once we start to protect ourselves, once we hide or hold back, once we slow down or shut down, we really are operating in a way that is inconsistent with what we all want, which is the culture we want. We want to feel safe. We want to feel open. We want to feel connected. We want to feel clear. So we got to be sure, use care and curiosity. That's why we just, name it, frame it, claim it. Try no blaming, no shaming, so we get no gaming, right? Be gentle with each other and move forward. Okay.
Thank you, Steve. That's so important. I know that is a big learning from me that I learned when someone is behaving in a certain way, there's nothing wrong with them. I need to be curious and learn. So I'm not going to blame them for their behavior. I'm going to learn about it. I'm also not going to shame them for the behavior, because it's likely coming from a good place. And if we can create that, they are feeling safe. So I want to put out there, we'll be taking questions in just a couple of minutes. So I know there's some questions already in the chat, but feel free to load some questions up for Steve and I to take on. So I really encourage you, as you go back to your workplace, what defines your culture? What are you seeing in practice? Not just what do you think is important, but what are you actually seeing? How are you seeing people interact? How are you interacting? Is it in line with what we say is important, or is it out of step? Because what you're seeing, what you're observing, is telling us a lot more than whatever the poster on the wall is. And if what you're observing is in line and within step, awesome, celebrate it. And if it's out of step, address it, but following the steps that Steve said. So I think, Steve, maybe one of the things we can do before we take questions is, and I know this is something we're actually going to we have a handout for you as part of our follow-up. We're going to send out the link to the webinar, but we're also going to give you a handout, which what we're sharing here is included in with a little bit more detail. But Steve, maybe you could walk the group through some key takeaways on how to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Because it starts with the conversation, and that's, I see some great questions in the chat already. And this is one of our favorite 5 steps. We use it with our clients. We use it with ourselves to bring values to life, so that we can move from this idea of plaques on the wall, or just this idea, to being intentional, and to give them the attention, and to retain the support and the development that we want for our culture. So step number 1 is identify important values. Which ones, as a team, as an organization, do we feel are important, that should be guiding our actions, interactions, and inactions? Once we identify that value, and again, I want to say, start with your team, right? Don't wait for the whole organization. That could be a big undertaking. Develop a shared understanding of what those values mean to you and others. So one of the most common ones is respect, right? Why is it important to develop a shared understanding? Because we meet people that have a different understanding of what respect is. Some people will feel that respect is about compliance and loyalty and fear, which might be problematic for people who believe that it's consideration, respect, and working together, right? Consideration, right? So that's number 2. Number 3 is, once you've developed a shared understanding, identify concrete behaviors of that value in practice. What does respect, what does inclusion, what does accountability look like in a one-on-one? What does it look like in our staff meetings or our team meetings? What does it look like when a mistake happens or when we need to course correct? Number 4 is recognize and reinforce. And this is so important. Most of you here, we can talk about culture and values. Guaranteed, each one of you last week in your respective workplaces probably behaved in a way 100 times or more, in a way that was in line with your values, in a way that was in line with the culture that you wanted. But most of us don't know, because nobody said, hey, way to go, Tanya, way to go, Liz, Corey, that was amazing, keep it up. We got to support and reinforce those values in practice. And finally, and this is the toughest one, right? But we can also help with this. We have a lot of communication strategies. We must connect with, gently and respectfully call out and correct the behaviors that are incongruent with important values. And it's just as simple as saying, hey, Chris, can we have a conversation? I noticed that you did this yesterday. How is that in line or out of line with what we were hoping for? Okay, so if we can stick to these 5 steps for bringing values to life, we're going to get closer to better, closer to attaining and strengthening that culture that we want, and move away from the one that we currently got. Chris, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Yeah, I love it, Steve. Thank you so much. And I think the bringing this all around for those of you that are leaders, we all contribute to organizational cultures without question. I want to be clear, if you aren't in a formalized leadership role, you are an influencer as well. But not letting these things sit and taking them on, but as Steve mentioned, with care and curiosity. So we are open to take some questions. There's a couple of questions here that I'll bring up, and there's a great one, Steve, I'll ask you in just a moment here. But just one of the things I wanted to circle back on, Steve talked earlier about the keys to healthy culture around those values in practice and that common language. These are actually 2 things that we focus the bulk of our time on, is working with organizations on that common language. And when Steve mentioned, that's about how people engage, how decisions are made, how conflict is managed. And if you can get that, and if you can articulate your values well, the interplay of those 2 things pretty much sets you up for success in whatever you're doing. So we're happy to help you with that. Now, Steve, here's a question for you. How do you change a culture in your area when the culture of the organization is different? So maybe there's a larger organization, you have some concerns within your specific area. How do you change that?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and good for you. I mean, great for you trying to make those efforts towards better. Now, we often hear about cultures that are the opposite of what we want or toxic. The reality is, most organizations have a set of values or principles or something somewhere. So we start with, are there some values that we as a team, like starting with individually or as a team, that we can aspire to or that we want to identify, share, and put into practice, right? We often talk about teams starting their own, developing their own charter, right? What do we as a team, what's important to us? What are the values that we as a team want to operate from, want to share, and want to guide us as we work together and as we interact either with our clients, with our patients, with our customers, and more importantly, with each other? I mean, that's the starting point, I think, is teams identifying individually. Have the conversation, larger. Like, what are your colleagues? Find allies, we call it, in the organization that value similar things and want to adhere or strengthen, become intentional about those values. That's my first. Those are the first things that come to mind. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree, Steve. Great recommendations. And I think one of the things, you can be a leader that's part of, maybe you work in government at a provincial level or at a federal level. Maybe you're working within our health system, and there is a much broader culture at play, without question, that does have an influence. But what we have seen, there are times, even in a system that isn't ideal, that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the healthiest culture, there we do see pockets of health within those systems. So one of the key takeaways, not knowing specifics with the individual asked this question, is what's important to you as a team, as Steve mentioned, relative to the context of what we're there to do, and how can we tend to our, we'll call it a small C culture in the bigger C, so we can create, Steve often refers to this as a bit of a cocoon of safety. So it's amazing when you'll be working with an organization, like I said, maybe it's government that is struggling, yet there's a group that is just knocking it out of the park. Well, they're connected to values that are important to them, and they're able to live them, and they're experiencing congruence. So great suggestion there, Steve. What a comment that was made before, and I think it's something to address, is, it's hard to, I'm not going to get the quote right exactly here, or, your values are tough to uphold when accountability is not upheld. And I agree with that statement. And I think I'll start with this one, because I very much agree with that individual. It's hard. I think one of the keys is, I will say, it starts with us, and going back to that leading by example. I agree. It can be disillusioning when we're seeing our senior leaders not living up to values. But if we can start with us as leaders, that starts to have an influence. And I know that doesn't solve. My next question is, how do we deal with incongruences when we see it? But I would say, just because we're seeing other leaders not behave as leaders need to, that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of behaving in ways. Steve, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We have other webinars. One was called "Accountability Shouldn't Hurt," and we had, like a lot of the webinars that we have on our site have spoken to a lot of these issues. And again, accountability is a value, right? So it's almost a paradox where we have accountability as a value, yet we feel that we're not holding each other to this. And I think what I really like about what you're saying, Chris, is it does start with us. If everybody, especially leaders, ask themselves how, I said it earlier, values are just words until our actions give them meaning. It doesn't really matter what's on the wall or in the binder in the strategic planning boardroom area. Is that what meaning are we giving these values by the way that we are interacting and the way that we're behaving? So I just wanted to say, I think it's great. Start with yourself, start with your team, and have the conversation. And we've talked about before, change what you can change, right? Do what you can. But if you're in relationships or in environments that you really have taken an effort at trying to develop, reinforce and live the values, and you feel that that's not a place that's changing, you've got to make a decision. Is this a place for me? Is this where I want to be? Do what you can, right? Do what you can to get closer to better in terms of aligning your behavior with the values that you and your team and your organization have said are important. Chris, back to you.
Awesome, Steve. I think we'll have to leave it at that. We were just coming up at 1:45. There's so many more discussions that we could have around this. I really encourage you, if you have questions for Steve or myself or any of us at Behaviour, reach out. So we are going to be sending out a follow-up within the next day or so. It's going to include the link to this website. We're going to have the participant guide. Let's keep these conversations going. Reach out to us. Steve and I both love to just stay connected. Let's have some more conversation. Do look for us on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn if you can. It's another great way to stay connected. Above all, thank you for joining us today and taking precious time out of your schedule to participate in this webinar with us. We're so grateful for your attendance. So have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.